Shifting your identity is one of those phrases that gets thrown around in self-improvement content so often it has almost lost its meaning. People say it like it's simple, just decide to be different, act like the person you want to become, and eventually you'll get there. And there's some truth in that, but what almost nobody explains is the mechanism underneath it. Why identity is so resistant to change. Why you might want to be different and still find yourself defaulting back to the same patterns, the same self-image, the same ceiling on what you believe is possible for you. Maxwell Maltz figured this out in the 1960s, and the book he wrote about it, Psycho-Cybernetics, is one of the most practically useful books on human psychology ever written. Maltz was a plastic surgeon, which is an unusual starting point for a self-improvement framework, but it's exactly that background that gave him the insight nobody else had at the time. So here's what I'm going to walk you through. The actual mechanism of identity, how it forms, why it resists change, and what genuinely shifting it looks like in practice. Built around Maltz's framework, with everything else that supports it woven in. By the end of this, you won't just understand identity change as a concept. You'll understand exactly why your previous attempts at it may not have worked and what to do differently. Maltz noticed something strange in his practice. He would perform successful surgeries, fix a nose, correct a scar, remove a disfigurement, and most patients would experience a dramatic shift in confidence and self-perception almost immediately. The external change produced an internal one, but a significant number of patients, even after objectively successful procedures, still felt ugly, still carried the same self-consciousness, the same social anxiety, the same belief that something was fundamentally wrong with how they appeared. The surgery had changed their face. It had done nothing to change how they saw themselves. That observation became the foundation of Psycho-Cybernetics. Maltz concluded that every person operates from a self-image, a mental picture of who they are, what they're capable of, and what they deserve, and that this self-image functions like a thermostat. It has a set point. And just like a thermostat brings the temperature back to its programmed level after it rises or falls, the self-image brings behavior, results, and circumstances back to whatever level it has been programmed to expect. This is why most attempts at self-improvement eventually plateau or collapse. The person changes their behavior, they start working harder, eating better, showing up differently, but the self-image hasn't moved. And the self-image, operating below the level of conscious awareness, quietly pulls everything back to the set point. The behavior was new, the identity underneath it was the same, and identity always wins over behavior in the long run. The term Maltz used for this internal guidance system was the servo mechanism, borrowed from engineering, where a servo mechanism is a self-correcting device that automatically steers toward a target. Your self-image is exactly that. It steers your behavior, your decisions, and your perception of what's possible toward whatever target it has been set to. Change the target and the mechanism follows. Leave the target unchanged and no amount of behavioral effort will produce lasting results because the system keeps correcting back. This reframes the entire project of self-improvement in a way that most people have never considered. The question stops being, how do I change my behavior? And becomes, how do I change the target my internal guidance system is steering toward? The behavior is downstream of the image. Fix the image and the behavior follows naturally. Try to fix the behavior while leaving the image intact and you're fighting the current every single day. James Clear touches this in Atomic Habits when he writes about identity-based habits, the idea that lasting change comes from changing who you believe you are rather than what you're trying to do. Clear is right about the direction. Maltz's contribution is explaining the mechanism in enough detail that you can actually work with it deliberately. So how does the self-image actually get programmed in the first place? And more importantly, how do you reprogram it? Maltz's answer to the first question is straightforward. The self-image is built from experience, specifically from the conclusions your mind drew from your experiences, particularly early ones. A child who struggled with reading and was told they were slow builds a self-image around academic limitation. A teenager who failed publicly at something builds a self-image around the risk of exposure. An adult who has tried and failed to change a pattern multiple times builds a self-image around being someone who can't maintain consistency. These aren't facts. They're interpretations that got accepted as facts and then built into the operating system. The crucial distinction Maltz makes is that the nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real experience and one that is vividly imagined. This is the finding that made Psycho-Cybernetics genuinely revolutionary when it was published, and it's been supported extensively by neuroscience since. The same neural pathways that activate during a real experience activate during a vivid mental rehearsal of that experience, which means you can feed the self-image new experiences without waiting for them to happen in the external world. This is what Maltz called theater of the mind, a mental rehearsal practice where you visualize yourself performing, behaving, and existing as the person you intend to become in enough sensory detail that the nervous system registers it as real experience. Athletes have used versions of this for decades. Soviet Olympic teams in the 1970s were using structured mental rehearsal as a training tool, and the results were documented well enough that Western sports programs eventually adopted the same approach. A pianist who mentally rehearses a piece activates the same motor cortex patterns as one who practices physically. The brain is building the same infrastructure either way. The practical application of this is more specific than just visualize your goals. Maltz is very clear that the visualization has to be first person, present tense, and sensory rich. You're not watching yourself succeed from a distance. You're inside the experience, feeling what it feels like, seeing what you'd see, moving through the scenario as if it's happening now. And you're doing this consistently in a relaxed state for long enough that the nervous system starts treating this picture of yourself as the reference point rather than the old one. The other side of Maltz's framework is what he calls psychological noise, the accumulated self-criticism, negative self-talk, and habitual pessimism that most people run constantly underneath everything they do. And his argument is that this noise isn't just unpleasant, it's actively feeding the old self-image. Every time you tell yourself you're not disciplined, not capable, not the kind of person who does this, you're casting a vote for the old target. You're reinforcing the set point you're trying to move away from. Viktor Frankl's work connects here in an important way. Frankl observed that the one freedom no external force can remove is the freedom to choose your response to any given situation, including your response to your own thoughts. The person who notices the negative self-talk and consciously refuses to accept it as fact is exercising exactly the kind of agency Frankl was describing. The thought arrives, you don't have to endorse it. Maltz prescribes a specific practice for this. When a negative self-assessment arises, I always do this. I'll never be able to. This is just who I am. You treat it the way you'd treat an obviously false statement someone else made. You don't argue with it extensively. You simply don't accept it. You replace it with a statement that reflects the self-image you're building, stated in present tense as if it's already true. Not, I'm trying to be more disciplined, but I am someone who does what I committed to doing. The difference in how the nervous system receives those two statements is significant. The timeline Maltz originally proposed for meaningful self-image change was a minimum of 21 days of consistent mental rehearsal and deliberate self-talk correction. That figure has been somewhat misappropriated. It became the popular habits take 21 days to form claim that circulates everywhere and is an oversimplification of what Maltz actually said. What he said was that it takes a minimum of 21 days to begin seeing a shift, and that the shift deepens with continued practice. More recent research from University College London suggests the average time for a behavior to become automatic is closer to 66 days, with significant variation depending on the complexity of the behavior. The point isn't the specific number. The point is that the self-image changes gradually through consistent input, not through a single moment of decision. This is important because most people give up on identity change during exactly the period when the change is actually happening, but not yet visible. The self-image is shifting underneath the surface. The behavior hasn't fully reflected it yet, and the person, seeing no obvious external change, concludes it isn't working and stops. The 21 days Maltz described wasn't a finish line. It was the beginning of the visible shift. What Maltz ultimately understood, and what makes Psycho-Cybernetics worth reading in full, rather than just summarizing, is that you are not your current self-image. The self-image is a construction. It was built from experiences and interpretations, many of which happened before you were old enough to evaluate them critically. And because it was built, it can be rebuilt. The servo mechanism doesn't care which target it steers toward. It just steers. Give it a new target consistently and vividly enough that the nervous system accepts it and the entire system reorients. The person you're capable of becoming is not waiting on better circumstances, more time, or a dramatic external change. They're waiting on a different picture of yourself, one that you build deliberately, feed consistently, and protect from the noise that tries to pull it back to the old set point. That's the whole mechanism. And now that you understand it, the question is whether you're going to use it. So that's all for today. I hope this video gave you something valuable to take away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.